And as we heard from the team, everything this year is new. They have not got experience of racing on any of the tracks that we've been to. The drivers had been to the Nordschleife of the Nürburgring before. Other than that, every track on the calendar will be new to them, and certainly new to the team with a brand new car. So yeah, an awful lot to learn. And their previous experience with the Volvo C30 might be vaguely material, but that was such a different car. The rules there were so different, the aero was so different, the chassis dynamics so different that you really struggle to carry an awful lot over of what they know from the races that they had previously been in. So Lada going very well indeed so far. Let's just recap. After the test session yesterday, Honda went 1, 2, 3. Nicky Katzberg was 4th, ahead of Ted Björk's Volvo in 5th. And this morning in the first free practice, Nicky Katzberg went fastest of all. In fact, the fastest 2 laps in free practice were both set by Nicky Katzberg on consecutive laps right at the end of the session. So you have to assume, although I didn't get a chance to check, that that was a fresh new tyre run. And behind Nicky Katzberg's Lada were the 3 Hondas, and then Ted Björk in 5th place in the Volvo. Then Gabriele Tarquini and Ugo Valente in their Ladas. So all the Ladas looking good. And I just sort of earwigged into the freeway open house debrief session with Lada, and I think that all the Ladas are going to go towards the setup that Nicky Katzberg had.
One tire and see how it goes. We can do 2 flying laps. If it's fine, you box and we put the fresh set. I'm not thinking it will be fine. Sorry, can you repeat?
Track looks pretty damp. Doesn't look for slicks, honestly.
You're okay to try with slicks?
Yeah, give it a try, but it's gonna be slower. But I'm okay to go off and then come in.
Okay, so there's the deal, is that the engineer is going, okay, so this is what we're going to do. And Pachito, that was probably recorded about a minute, 90 seconds ago. Pachito saying, it looks pretty damp, it doesn't look like slicks. Now, that to me suggests that he has slicks on, and he was saying, I'm going to go out and give it a try anyway. And I would think at the moment it's a little bit blustery. It is spitting with rain, so it's a light sprinkling of rain. It's not heavy rain yet, so in English we would refer to that as drizzle. There's all sorts of different words for it. You can see it's not really raining heavily. However, yeah, on board with Norby, he's on slicks, isn't he? That is not a man who has a groove tyre under him. That is a man who has got a nice smooth wide surface of rubber, which is struggling to find traction, even fresh out of the tyre heaters. So everybody's going to be coming back in because on board with Ivan, showing Pachito having a little bit of a slide there off the curbs. That was turn 7 and 8, and this is popping up at the brow, turn 9 and 10. Yeah, they're all on slicks, and they're all going to be coming back in because you're learning nothing now other than, even with this little sprinkling of rain, it's not slicks weather. Now, this is a low grip racetrack. It hasn't had a lot of use. It rained really heavily on Thursday. It rained a long time last night. Everything was very wet this morning. The track surface wasn't so bad in free practice 1, but a lot of the region, even a few miles away, was very wet indeed, and the runoff areas are pretty damp. I don't think anybody's particularly feeling the love for slicks right now. I think that's just like, you can see the tyres leaving marks there. Now, is that Tiago? Tiago might be on a wet. I wonder if Mehdi Banani, the second of the Citroens there, is on a wet, and maybe Gregoire de Mouste as well. I'm not sure. If Lopez goes in, no, Lopez stays out. So who took wet weather tyres then? I can't imagine from the way that everybody was sliding around beforehand that these guys were on wet. And certainly from what Pachito was saying to the engineer, it didn't sound like he was on wet. Sounded like they started on slicks and he was going to give it a try, and in the background Ivan finds that the grip level is not quite what he was expecting. So Norby, I'm assuming, is going straight onto a wet weather tyre. Right, should we stop faffing about? Let's just go out onto a wet and see what we're doing. Now, this brings us to a little conversation that we're having earlier on with Jérôme Roussel, the PR man at Total Citroën Racing, saying that in the 3 or 2.5 seasons now that Citroën have been in the championship, they have not had a wet qualifying. Okay, which then begs the question, when was the last wet qualifying? And I have to say, we were struggling to find an answer to that, and did come up with the first visit to Brands Hatch, which was a very wet weekend, and we think maybe that was a wet qualifying. Alain Menu claimed pole position, didn't he? If I recall, in the Chevrolet, and that was, I think it was back-to-back poles then, I think, because he said the last time he'd been at Brands Hatch in British touring cars, he had also been on pole in a Mondeo. Does that sound right? I might be fumbling in the dark here, as you may have guessed. But have we had a wet qualifying since that first trip to Brands? And that was, what, 2006, possibly? Have we had wet qualifying in a decade? Are we going to get wet? You know, this might be it might be dry by the time we get to qualify. It might not. It might be very, very wet indeed. And that could certainly change the playing field a little, because in the dry conditions, the Citroëns, the best of the Citroëns, Jose Maria Lopez, was, in fact, it wasn't even Jose Maria Lopez. Best of the Citroëns was Ivan Muller. He was 1.4 seconds away. Now, at the moment, they are looking a little more competitive as the grip levels are low. Rob Huff has just gone quickest of all as he shoots by Ivan Muller. We were going to have a bit of a voiced lap with Nicky Katzberg. This could be quite entertaining, actually, if he does it now, because it is, as Tom Chilton proves, fairly low grip out there. Well held, sir. Taubert coming in for, you assume, a change to wets. Gabriele Tarquini has gone in for wets as well. The Honda's not yet. What's the lap? 1:59.278 from Huff. John Philippi second quickest. Look at the green and black Zengo Motorsport Honda. That car in the hands of Ferenc Fischer, ahead of all the Citroëns, including fastest man Ivan Muller in first practice. That shows you how much the Citroën team were struggling, and the Sebastian Loeb Racing Citroëns were struggling as well. It is now properly wet, isn't it? It's not just a bit of drizzle, it's actually raining quite hard, and the track is very wet. So does that mean all these guys are either A, somehow surviving on slicks, look how hard it's raining out the back now, or did they all go out on wets? I don't think Katzberg did, judging by his pace here. I think this is a man nursing it home on a slick in conditions that are suddenly very definitely not slick conditions. A second big hold from Tom Chilton. Hope his hot laps at Brands Hatch don't look like that too often. Well, de Moustier not coming in, Huff not coming in either. Okay. So what's Huff on wets? Well, let's hear from Nicky Katzberg. Let's take a trip round the track.
Hello everyone, welcome on board my Lada Vesta GT1 car. We're gonna do a wet lap of the Moscow Raceway. It's gonna be one of my first laps in the wet. So yeah, we're gonna try to stay off the normal line, because usually there is no grip, so a little bit outside here. Trying to stay off the curb zones. Next corner, same story, outside. Back to the apex here, be careful on the throttle. Very long turner to the right here, quite difficult, some oversteer. Going around the outside here, stay away from the rubber, slow corner, slowest of the track. Around the outside here again. Short shift to third, over the curb zone here. Should be a flat out section even in the wet. I pick up some almost went off there. Some oversteer. This corner is uphill braking. outside, back to the inside, staying off the rubber once again. Outside, back to inside. Very low grip, very low grip. Same here, I'm just going to try to drive around the outside. Normally there's the most grip. Back to the power. Very technical part of the circuit here. In the dry conditions, this is the most interesting part to me because it's the most difficult. Getting ready for a long straight, a good exit is important. Trying to have no wheel spin. Following the Hondas, trying to get a little slipstream. Long straight, braking is very important in the race. This is a great overtaking spot. Now I'm braking offline, going back outside. And trying to have as good possible exit. This was Nick Duxroy for a wet lap on the Moscow Raceway.
And now, be nice to, ooh, big handful off opposite there in the first corner. Be nice to find out if he really did have slicks on. I think he probably did. Was doing a good job in avoiding the racing line and talking and holding a little grassy off-track moment as well. Gabriele Tarquini has been in and out, so you have to assume he is on wet weather tyres. So too is who else just went out? Mehdi Banani, Nasician, Jose Maria Lopez is in, Muller is in, Coronel is in, Ted Bjork and Hugo Valente have just gone out as well, so they're now on wet weather tyres as well. Rob Huff fastest of all at 1:58.01, which is 20 seconds slower than they were going in the dry. 20 seconds on a 90-second lap or 100-second lap, normally in the dry. Gabriele using the racing line a little more now than you saw from Nicky Katzberg because he has got the wet weather tyre, which helps to maybe give him a fraction more grip and confidence. And he goes quickest. So 1:57.7, 3/10 quicker than Rob Huff. And Thiago Montero now with the fastest first sector. Who was that stationary on inside the first corner? Rob Huff. Well, he either went out on wets or he's being very ballsy on a slick tyre. Because Huffy is still going quicker than Tarquini, which makes me assume that Huff went out on a wet. We'll see whether Alex can ferret out that bit of information. Talking to Jimmy T earlier on, as we see Thompson in our camera shot there, and he couldn't remember when there was, Huff did go out on wets. Jimmy Thompson couldn't remember when there was a wet qualifying either. He said, if my free practice 2 is rubbish, I'm blaming you, because I can't think of two things at the same time, and now you've just made me think of when was the wet qualifying session. So Fredrik Ekblom, 9th fastest in the first free practice session, and currently he hasn't actually done a fast flying lap yet. Does now and goes 10th quickest with a 2-minute 0.9, and his previous dry lap was a 1-minute 39.5. So again, 20 seconds slower than they were. And this is going to be definitely a feature, is that in any kind of damp conditions, what is already a low grip surface becomes a veritable skating rink. Well, Huffy's going to get a couple of extra laps out of this compared to most others, isn't he, having gone out on wet weather tyres? I'm sort of assuming that Thiago might have done as well, because he hasn't been in. Who else hasn't been in? Nicky Katzberg hasn't, James Thompson hasn't, and Grégoire de Moustier hasn't. So perhaps they all went out on wets as well. Maybe that's why Nicky Katzberg could actually drive and talk at the same time and produce some sort of speed out of his lap. John Philippi has just come into the pits, 6th quickest at the moment, Philippi. Ferenc Fitzgerald there, just in front of Norby Mikulis. Norby, the factory Honda driver, and Ferenc now in with the Zengo Motorsport team, which Norby has been associated with so far for all his career. And Ferenc currently 13th, not feeling quite so much the love for the circuit in these conditions. But Ferenc was 11th fastest in the first session when it was dry, and doing a really good job ahead of all the Citroens. And the other really outstanding performance, I thought, came from John Philippi. Now, Philippi tends to blow a little bit hot and cold, and that would seem to be a confidence deal. He was pretty competitive in terms of pace in Paul Ricard. Gabriele Tarquini just venturing a little bit off track. And pretty competitive here. And it tends to be tracks where there's a little bit more of a margin for error, where he really feels he can extend himself in the car. Still fairly young racing drivers, still building on the knowledge banks that a lot of his rivals in the championship have. And when there is room to make an error, and there, you know, there's not at places like Marrakesh, there's not at places like the Nordschleife, is there? He reins it in a little bit there, because you don't learn anything by wrecking the car. But when there is a track like this, a more racing circuit style circuit, if you like, then he tends to be able to push it a bit more, knowing that he's got room should he slip on the high wire. You know, these guys aren't just driving around relatively quickly, they are driving right on the very limit of adhesion at all times. And so if you get it wrong on a street circuit, and this is going to apply next time out, particularly when we go to Villarreal, you can have a very big shunt indeed. If you get it wrong on this circuit, a little bit less so. There you go, perfect example there, more margin for error. Ugo Valente overcooks it into turn one on the street circuit, car wrecked, red flags. On a permanent facility like this, runoff area, goes off, comes back on, no damage done. Now, of course, there are places pretty much on any race circuit, even a really modern one, where if you get it wrong, you can have a big thump with the barriers or something else that doesn't move very much, or somebody else that's coming past. But if you've got that margin for error, it just is a little bit more of a confidence-inspiring thing. Gabriele Tarquini fastest for Lada, Thiago Montero, Rob Huff and Norbert Michelitz next up for Honda. Ugo Valente and Nicky Katzberg for Lada. So that's your top half dozen. Then John Philippi, Chevrolet, James Thompson, Chevrolet, and finally there is a Citroen in the top 10, and it's not this one, it is the car of Mehdi Benani. So the Moroccan driver is in 9th place, Ted Björk 10th, Ivan Muller goes 9th, and Mehdi is 10th, and Gabriele, despite wet weather tyres and all his experience, gets the braking just a little bit wrong at the end of the lap. But again, lots of runoff area, no harm, no foul. Fastest second sector of all there, and that didn't necessarily involve using bits of road that you didn't alter. On board with Thiago, and again, same as Nicky Katzberg, look, middle of the road for braking, then comes over a little closer to the racing line, but he's leaving a full car width out to the curbs, and that avoids going on the rubber. Why do you avoid going on the rubber? Well, where there is rubber, if you spray it with water, it becomes more slippery than tarmac, because the rubber tends to fill some of the gaps in the tarmac that otherwise would allow the water to drop into them. And the other thing, of course, is that where rubber is, cars have been, and where cars have been, no matter how good they are, generally there will be a bit of oil down as well. So for all those reasons, when it gets wet, you tend to avoid the racing line, and you avoid the curbs because paint with water on is not grippy. Lesson 1 of riding a motorcycle is stay off paint. Lesson 2, in the rain, really stay off paint, and that applies equally for a racing car. Thiago Montero now fastest of all, 1:56.5, and Thiago in the first session 1:39.0, so still a long way away from the times we saw earlier on. However, again there, after that flying lap, you just saw him take a little bite too much out of turn 1. Greg de Moustier coming out of the pits after a practice start. still raining. And still raining fairly consistently here in Moscow. Now, whether it continues to rain for qualifying or not remains to be seen. We've got a bit of time until qualifying at 2 o'clock local time, and then Mach 3 at 3 o'clock. However, that is a long window, isn't it? From 2 to 3:30 for it all to remain totally dry. Rob Huff comes across the line second quickest. And that's 1800 slower than Thiago. Gabriele Tarquini third. And 12 months ago, we'd have said that's a Honda 1-2-3. Things have changed, of course, since then, because Gabriele is now in yellow overalls. So it is Honda, Lada, then Norby. There he is in 4th place for the factory Honda team. Ugo Valente 5th, Nicky Katzberg 6th. Tom Coronel is now the top Chevrolet. Let's hear what the Honda team and Norby have to say.
Sector times, we are losing 1.8 tenths in sector 1. We are the best on the second sector, and 4 tenths we lose on the last sector.
Okay, I will stay out just to learn if there have come new lines to explore. As soon as I feel a drop in front tire performance, I will come to the pit.
That seems entirely sensible. Norby with a green first sector on the last lap, which means a personal best. Ugo Valente with a purple first sector, so Valente is on a flyer. Tom Coronel, best of the independents, best of the Chevrolets as well. Currently 7th, ahead of John Philippi. And behind them, again, the very best of all the Citroën drivers is currently Jose Maria Lopez, the reigning world champion. And he is lying in 9th place, James Thompson 10th. So Lopez only just splitting the Chevrolets. Remind me again how old the Chevy Cruze is as a World Touring Car car. Well, in this spec, what, 3 years? However, it goes back a bit further, doesn't it? Tarquini goes quicker again, 1:56.3, but we are just sort of whittling away here, aren't we, at tenths and finding pace rather than slicing seconds out of it. So the track is not drying, well, it's certainly not dry. However, it's looking less wet, much less wet. So it looks like the rain may well have stopped. Definitely looks like it stopped up here. Norby still finding it very low grip in the final corner. Quick lap from Ugo Valente to go 4th. Norby on a purple lap in Sector 1 and Sector 3. His teammates are both headed into the pits, Montero and Huff. On board with Pachito. Look at the windscreen, barely a drop. Nicky Katzberg was waiting there to do a practice start behind the Volvo of Ted Björk. Yikes. Gabriele still pushing on it, and as Norby was saying, Gabriele is staying out there and going quicker as the water gets less, but he's also exploring, and he may be finding more little bits of track that actually yield grip that he might not have expected. And this is what you've got to do in these conditions, you know. If you don't have several years worth of wet weather experience at a track, is you've got to try a different line. Well, let's go online and see what happens now that it's relatively dry. And let's then go offline and see what happens. Tom Chilton again having a big oversteering moment. Nick is engineer. Those Sebastian Loeb Racing beanie hats are now very valuable. Yes, it's June, everybody. It's Le Mans next week. It's not March. It just feels like it. Ferenc Fischer not feeling the love in these wet weather conditions, I'm afraid. Down in 16th place. Still ahead of Tom Chilton, but looks a little bit uncomfortable and oversteering. And this is a sort of tricky position. How much has he driven the car in the wet? Well, a bit, but he's sort of threateningly bitting his way around everything, and I wonder whether just a little bit more speed would actually give him the grip that he's trying to find. Ugo Valente Little bit speed didn't give him the grip he was trying to find there, did he? Did it? But again, nice tarmac runoff area once you get over that little strip of grass in which to sort everything out before you get to the barriers. So that all helps. So tyre temperatures, tyre pressures. Is it time for a change back to slicks yet? Just because the track's declared wet doesn't mean you have to use wets. Here's James Thompson, Tom Coronel. Tommy is 7th, Jimmy T is 11th at the moment. Don't forget, in Marrakesh, James started from the front row of the opening race grid and looked like he might be on for a big result till he got shunted out very early on. Few spots of water on the camera lens, very few indeed. James working with long-time compadre engineer Marco Calovolo in the team this weekend. So Marco shuttling between British touring cars and World Touring Cars. Last week Alton Park, this week Moscow, next week Croft. Oh, it's all glamour, I tell you. You know, there are bits of the track that really look like, okay, yeah, that's definitely slicks, and there are bits of the track where you go, nope, what was I thinking? And this, unfortunately, is where, and here's a note for the future, and it's never happened yet, but it would be good if we could, is where it would be really nice to have sidewall markings clearly visible on the tyre that tells idiots like me whether it's a wet tyre or a dry tyre, because you can't see from the outside. However, if Tom turns into the corner and the Yokohama is all in white going round, we'll know it's a slick, and all in yellow, say, we'd know it was a wet. But we don't have that, much as it would be nice. Maybe that's something we can look at for another season. Thiago Monteiro, purple first sector. Rob Huff, green first sector. But some 8/10 slower. Thiago, purple second sector. Ferenc Fischer not finding grip at all, is he? The Zengo Motorsport team really need to try and find a little bit more for him. He went off there, but actually he's just gone 10th quickest. Thiago on a real flyer, though. He's on a tear. Well, there's Ferenc. That's just after going 10th quickest. So, said a couple of minutes ago, he looked like he wasn't finding any grip at all. But he clearly has found quite a lot, and so too has Thiago, 1:55.5. Okay, so our slowest recorded lap is a 2 minutes 0.06 from Fredrik Ekblom. And we've got a 1:55.5, so 4.5 seconds quicker. That's a big spread, but that's what happens in the wet. Benani in his Citroen 4 seconds slower. Ivan Muller 3.9 seconds slower. Tom Chilton 3.5 seconds slower. Even the double world champion 3.3 seconds slower. And the best of the Citroens is currently Grégoire de Moustier, 11th, 3.25 seconds slower than the best of the Hondas. So Citroen are finding this racetrack a challenge. Now, it might be because of chassis dynamics, it might be because of the wheelbase of the car, it might be because of the extra ballast they're carrying, and yada, yada, yada. It's not. It's everything added up together. And I'm afraid with a car that's not rotating well and producing grip in the dry, if you reduce the grip at the surface, then that compounds their issue. James Thompson currently 8th. He's just been bumped by... who went quicker? I think Ted Björk did. Touring Car Times' Neil Hudson says, I remember Donington being wet in 2011. Yes. Was it wet in qualifying? It was wet, wasn't it? That might be a one. I'm writing that down. Donington 2011. And who was on pole in that one? Oh, I can't remember. Far too old. James Thompson I shall go and relieve him of the pressure of trying to remember while he's driving. Now up to 6th quickest, 1:57.2. At the moment, it's a 2-horse race with the Ladas and the Hondas vying for quickest times. We've got Honda Montero, Lada Tarquini, Lada Valente, Honda Michelitz, Honda Huff, and then James Thompson in the Chevrolet ahead of Nicky Katzberg's Lada. Katzberg has just pitted. Norby pitted and has just gone back out. Remember, he was saying when he felt a drop-off in front tyre performance, he'd be going back in. Well, we'll throw this down to Alex. She can't tell us, but she could let us know whether Norby has maybe changed onto slicks. And if Thiago was on a slick when he set that lap. Here's Ivan Muller, currently, well, he was languishing down in 14th. He's now popped up to 7th. James Thompson 6th. In fact, there's been a raft of improvements, and Ferenc Fischer has been pushed down from 10th to 12th place. Mehdi Banani has got himself into the top 10 as well. So as the track becomes less damp in the final minutes, suddenly the Citroens seem to be able to turn on the tyre a little bit. This is the first time a Citroen's been in the top 12 in free practice. Ivan Muller 7th, Mehdi Banani 9th. However, de Moustier is 13th, Lopez 14th, Chilton 16th. So that's a combination of Sebastian Loeb Racing and factory Citroen drivers way outside the top 12. Well, way outside the top 12, outside the top 12. And in terms of time, more than half a second to find, even to get into 12th place, which is no use for reverse grids. Norby stayed on wet weather tyres, apparently. And you can still see a bit of spray coming up from the back of Gabriele Tarquini's car, but you can really see a very different looking track, can't you? Look, he's going on the racing line in the final corner and sort of finding grip as well. I mean, we're not going to be setting 1:39s. Tarquini comes across the line, 1:55.5. That's not bad. Flag is out. Tarquini's taken it. So too is Rob Huff. Norby steaming up the straight in the good ship Honda. Ivan Muller just going through shot. De Moustier takes the flag. He's 13th. Ivan Muller on a personal best lap to go 6th. Just pips James Thompson. And there is a Lada behind him, which is a first so far this weekend. Now, in terms of Ivan's attempts to rein in Jose Maria Lopez, or in fact anyone's attempts to rein in Jose Maria Lopez, we basically need for the championship to remain even vaguely open. We need the Argentine to be stone last in qualifying and in both races and score absolutely nothing. And probably for the next 3 race weekends as well. Such are his powers of recuperation. Thiago Monteiro, fastest at the end of the session then, completes another lap. And this is another better one, goes a 1:55.309. So that's a quarter of a second quicker than anybody else. Ivan Muller was on pole at Donington Park, says Neil Hudson. Race was dry. Muller hit Huffy in the race. No, Huff obviously backed into Muller, clearly. Started their grumbles. Okay. The only track that Robert Dahlgren knew that year, and of course that was Volvo C30 time, wasn't it? And he spun off in wet qualifying. Oops. I'm assuming that was down the Craner curves. That would be the place most people would spin off in wet qualifying. So there you see our timing screen. Purple sectors all over the place in the final lap from Nicky Katzberg, from Rob Huff, and the final purple sector from Thiago Monteiro. Well, in fact, it wasn't a purple sector in any of his fastest lap. He had 2 blacks and only 1 green sector, so only 1 sector on that fastest lap of all from Thiago was actually quicker than sectors he'd previously done. So he lost time in the first and the third part of the lap and gained a lot more in the middle. Here's Pachito. Angle of the dangle just a little bit more than he needs there. And this is the rear steer effect on the car when you put in the toe we were talking about in the first part of free practice, and add all of that extra rear steer to rotate around the front. You can obviously over-egg the pudding in any engineering direction. And there you saw the tail trying to drag him off the track. Let's hear from Thiago.
Okay, yeah, similar as before. Of course, the first few laps it was a better grip overall. And now every lap it's drying a little bit, so I think the last one to cross the line should be faster. But the balance is very similar as before. I will tell you more when I want to come in.
And when other people can't hear, yes, indeed. Good stuff. So, as we suspected, time's improving because the track was getting less wet or drying up a little bit. I mean, it was still pretty damp. And as we said earlier, very low grip surface means a late change onto slicks rather than an early change onto slicks is probably the way it's going to go. James Thompson being pulled in there, 6th quickest in the session. And, okay, it was 0.06 away from 5th, Ugo Valente. And that is, in these conditions, that's in real shooting distance of top 5. If it's a bit miserly when we get into qualifying at 2 o'clock, all bets could be off. That could be very, very entertaining. Tomo might put the Chevrolet into the top 5. Coronel's done it already this season. And I'm sure Jimmy T would love to be able to produce that kind of performance. So with Thiago Montero, engineer just sorting out something on the dash there. Fastest man in free practice, Jose Maria Lopez with a few things to think about. So, Thiago having an Italian conversation. Thiago Montero, Portuguese, speaks Portuguese plainly, speaks English fluently, speaks French fluently. Clearly he speaks a lot of Italian, and he was having a Spanish conversation in the lift with Jose Maria Lopez on the way down to breakfast this morning. So what's that? Portuguese, English, French, Italian, Spanish, at least 5 languages he speaks fluently and very coherently. And he has the fastest time in the session as well. So which one of those languages is Alex Legui going to use to interview him in? Maybe she should get him to reply in all 5 of his various different languages. I wonder how much Japanese he speaks. I bet he speaks some. I bet he speaks Japanese. Well, let's get down to the Honda garage with Alex and Thiago.
Fastest man out on campus, Thiago, very nicely done there, purple sectors. Looks like very low grip.
Yeah, it's very slippery out there, but it's the same for everybody, I guess. You just have to find the right lines and the right balance, the right tire pressure, and get the confidence. Yeah, I think it's really about confidence.
How's the car feeling? Looks like all 3 of you are setting some nice lap times.
Feels good. I mean, it's slippery, but obviously less than the others, so we'll take it. I mean, it's the car feels good to drive. A little bit tricky on entries, a little bit tricky on exit of the corners, but probably a bit less than the others, so we were fast.
And any idea what the conditions are looking like for qualifying?
Sorry?
Conditions for qualifying?
Well, it's supposed to rain a bit more, but it's kind of stopping now, so it will be a little bit of a lottery. We were fast on the dry yesterday and this morning. We seem okay on damp conditions. Let's see how it is on wet conditions. So it is always a track that suits us in the past. Let's see if it keeps this way.
Yeah, and fingers crossed for another podium for you.
Thank you, I hope so.
Well, I've got to get through qualifying first, but as Thiago said, you know, that's what you need in the championship. You need tracks where certain cars work and other cars don't, otherwise there's no light and shade. You know, Citroën have been extraordinarily good at producing a C-Elysée that works at just about everywhere, but when it's tight and twisty, the slightly shorter wheelbase of the Honda and the Lada really work better. And so the Chevy Cruze is sort of in the middle of the two, but the Citroën C-Elysée prefers longer, faster corners than are predominantly the case here, and that's why you see them struggling a little. Now, of course, for the Citroën drivers trying to catch Jose Maria Lopez, the fact that they're all struggling isn't helping because they're all struggling. So qualifying could be good. Join us at 2 p.m. Russian time, which is at 11 Greenwich Mean Time for qualifying. We'll see you then. Do svidaniya.
Hello everyone, welcome on board my Lada Vesta TC1 car. We're gonna do a wet lap of the Moscow Raceway. It's gonna be one of my first laps in the wet. So yeah, we're gonna try to stay off the normal line because usually there is no grip, so a little bit outside here. Trying to stay off the curb zones. Next corner, same story, outside. Back to the apex here, be careful on the throttle. Very long turner to the right here, quite difficult, some oversteer. Going around the outside here, stay away from the rubber, slow corner, slowest of the track. Around the outside here again. Short shift to third, over the curb zone here. Should be a flat out section even in the wet. I pick up some almost went off there. Some oversteer. This corner is uphill braking. Outside, back to the inside, staying off the rubber once again. Outside, back to inside. Very low grip, very low grip. Same here, I'm just going to try to drive around the outside. Normally there's the most grip. Back to the power. Very technical part of the circuit here. In the dry conditions, this is the most interesting part to me because it's the most difficult. Getting ready for a long straight, a good exit is important. Trying to have no wheel spin. Following the Hondas, trying to get a little slipstream. Long straight, braking is very important in the race. This is a great overtaking spot. Now I'm braking offline, going back outside and trying to have as good possible